My paternal grandfather was Jesse Smith, and my maternal grandfather was James Arthur Bryce. My father was Robert Augustus Smith, and my mother was Sue Byrne Bryce Smith. I was born in this house in July of 1918. I'm 93 years of age at this, almost at this moment. All of my paternal forebears took their living from the Delta, which is less than a mile from here. They were all in the logging business of one kind or another. My grandfather actually owned a railroad. It was a locomotive that had flanged wheels on it. And instead of iron rails, it used poles that were cut out of the ponds around the area. And during the time he operated, it was about 2 miles from here and toward Tensas, at the top of the next big hill over there. We call it Turner's Hill. And he logged all of the longleaf pine that was in that area and put it in Majors Creek and floated it to the bigger waters and eventually to Mobile. He did this for a number of years, and at the same time engaging in all sorts of farming activities, because you had to have animals to move logs around, and you had to have feed for animals. And about the only place that you could grow enough feed to really feed a group of animals was in the Delta itself, because we didn't have access to fertilizer out here in the piney woods. So you had to go, and he was about the third generation of farmers in the Delta. The Indians were the first. And the white man took over from them and had the big plantations. And with the end of the cotton era, then it was just used for food for animals that we used out here in the piney woods. And in his last days, he operated somebody else's old plantation over on the Alabama River. Most of the crops that he grew were food crops for his animals and for his family. He gardened, he grew the peas and the beans, but mainly velvet beans, and he grew a whole lot of chores. This was a pumpkin-like fruit, and he hauled them out of there in wagons and piled them up at his home and fed them to his cows and hogs in the wintertime. They had to be chopped up with an axe into smaller pieces so these animals could get them. My grandfather had 7 sons, and they all entered the logging business of one kind or another. My father was one of them. He was Robert Augustus Smith, and he had some kind of a logging operation going on all of his life. When I first became aware of things, he was running a small steam sawmill about 2 miles from here. That particular sawmill blew up and hurt some people. Some of his crew were pretty badly, nobody was killed, but that sort of put him into the logging business. And he had ox teams, and he had the wooden ox carts and ox wagons. And in dry weather, he would go to the swamp, and in wet weather, he would come to the piney woods. He tried to keep a job going on each place, depending on the weather. The logs that he harvested in the piney woods, of course, were pine. Largely longleaf during his time. And the first logs that were logged in the swamp were cypress. Along about World War I time, the furniture business moved south from the East Coast. They cut out up in that area with all the hardwood timber, and they found a treasure trove of oak and sycamore and beech and other hardwoods that made good furniture. And my father teamed up with the owner of the Oswald Towing Company, and they went into a business of their own, Oswald and Smith. My dad would go out and find these tracts of land that he thought he could buy, and log enough off of it to pay for the timber and the land, and keep the land. The towing company made their money out of the towing part of the business. My father made his money out of the law business. And then together they just owned the cut over land. And in that manner, at one time, they owned about 8,000 acres of swamp land. Depression days came, and there were reverses in the business, and my father lost his half of it back to his partner. So he wound up a mighty small landowner. My very first memory is of standing on a pile of lumber out in the backyard here at my home, and one piece of that lumber was sticking out like a springboard. And I remember jumping up and down on that springboard and saying to myself, I'm 3 years old. I'm 3 years old today. I'm 3 years old. I have some vague memories of people that had to be present in my life before then, but the memories are so vague. But on that particular day, I was 3 years old. Now, about that time, my parents began to talk to me about how nice it would be if I had a brother or sister. And one day, I suddenly found myself visiting an aunt about 3 miles down the road, and I was there for a day or so. And then somebody informed me that I had a new brother at home. I was so excited, I didn't know what to do. I just couldn't wait to get back up here, because they'd been talking about how nice it would be for me to have somebody to play with. Well, I was brought back home, and I was showed this new brother. And that was the most insignificant sight. I was totally disappointed. That little red thing, I couldn't possibly play with that. I've never been as disappointed in my life as my first look at my brother. But both of us did grow up, and we had a great time playing together. Most of our play was some form of hunting. We first had bows and arrows. We never killed anything with one, but we shot a lot of bows and arrows and shot at a lot of birds. I don't ever remember hitting one with what we had, but we graduated to air rifles, and we killed a lot of birds. As a matter of fact, my mother stuffed a pillow with the feathers of all the songbirds. Now, there was one bird that we were not allowed to kill, and that was a mockingbird, but the rest of them were fair game. And in the winter, when the robins came, that was fun in this world. Before, we would wait out for a school bus, and cedar trees around here in those days bore their fruit in the wintertime. For some reason, they do it in the summertime now. I talked to Fred Nations about that the other day. He said that there are two varieties of cedars growing around here, and we probably have changed cedar trees. But anyway, waiting for that school bus, there would be 10 or 15 robins lying around on the ground. My mother would go out and pick them up and save the feathers for the feather bed. We manufactured all sorts of toys. Little trucks to haul logs on. We had roads around here. And we had a lot of cousins who were roughly our age, and they came and went. When my brother got to be about 6 years old, he began to have a mysterious illness. There was some kind of allergy with some kind of a rash over his body, and eventually destroyed his kidneys. But he overcame it about the time he went to high school and was a healthy boy there, and went into service and died in service of a kidney-related problem. Now, he spent much of his life, much of my early life, he spent in hospitals in Mobile. And it disrupted our family life so that he and my mother would generally be in Mobile, either in a hospital or in an apartment close to a hospital. And I spent most of my young life with my grandparents. My grandfather died when I was about junior high school age, and then it was my job to spend the nights with my grandmother, so that even through even through high school, I spent much of my time away from home. In my young days, I had quite a carefree life. I was free to roam the woods and run with the other kids. Our favorite game was playing fox and the dog. The way you played that game was everybody had a school bag, and we would tear up into small bits of the newspaper of yesterday, and we would pack this school bag full of little tiny bits of newspaper, and that was scent. And one person would be the fox, and all the other kids in the neighborhood would be the dogs. And I was generally the fox. And you would run for miles through the woods in every direction, dropping little pieces of paper out of that school bus bag for scent. And the pack of dogs would come behind you, yow, 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 yow. And then you would lay off false trails, and you would hide behind logs and and let the dogs pass you. And you would delight in climbing trees and watching them go there. There really wasn't much work around home. My dad didn't do any farming in my time, so that other than feeding the chickens and when I got old enough to milk a cow, but there was always stove wood to get in. And it was my job to keep the wood box full at my own home and at my grandparents' home. My father, having a logging crew, would, whenever he was logging close around, he always cut stove wood and house wood for the winter and racked it up. And it was all right in those days to cut firewood on anybody's land you came to, as long as it was non-merchantable timber. And the scrub oak around was fair game. And it was also fair game for anybody in the community who didn't have any wood to go wherever he could find stacks of wood in the woods. And my dad had lots and lots of stove wood cut, and lots of bigger, we called it house wood if you were going to burn it in the fireplace in the wintertime, but there was always a shortage of it because somebody always harvested this wood in the woods before he could get to it. But it was my job to keep the wood box filled. As I grew up, it was my job to thin corn in season, which my grandfather usually tended to the gardening and the little light farming operations that we did. But thinning corn was my deal. And when I got old enough, I was expected to plow a little bit, and I learned to do that and milk the cow. But there wasn't any great work for a young fellow to do. But I really enjoyed following my father about the logging woods. I could I could do this, of course, at will in the summertime, but it was a rare treat to get to do it in the wintertime. I remember a trip that I made with my father to investigate whether he was going to log the Blakeley battlegrounds. This was, I would say it was about 1925, because I think we were driving a new 25 Model T Ford. In those days, there was no paved road between here and Blakeley. Well, it was roughly 225 as it exists now. And I remember going down there and driving up and down the streets of old Blakeley. Many of the buildings were still standing. Brick buildings. The roofs had collapsed, and they were all completely covered with vines of one kind or another, but there were two parallel streets that were still open. One right down the waterfront, and one parallel to the east of it. It seems to me that they might have been a quarter of a mile long. That might have been less than that. But all along there were these old abandoned buildings. And the courthouse was pretty well standing in 1925. I know that my dad told me that that was the courthouse. He later logged the place, or he tried to, but there was so much shrapnel in those longleaf pine trees that the mill soon shut him down. It wouldn't take them. Run the saws. Latham had a 12th grade school when I went in about 1924. It was a 2-room school, 6 grades to the room. 2 Tenshaw residents were teachers down there. Well, one of them was gone by the time I went there, but the principal of the school was from Tenshaw, Mr. Till, and he taught the 2 upper grades. And a lady from Summerdale was my 1st grade teacher, Alice Manick. She later married into this community. I was there. My father was a trustee of the school, and it was during the years of consolidation. And by the time we got to the 5th grade, a new school had been built in Stockton, and the 6 upper grades were immediately transferred there and to Bay Minette by bus. And but the Latham School remained for about 3 months. It was closed kind of gradually. They didn't force people at first. My father, being a trustee, felt that it was his duty to keep me in this Latham School for as long as he could, and did until about Thanksgiving of my 5th year down there. And then he gave up, and we all went to Stockton, and I joined the rest of my friends down there. I know of one other person who is still living who was in my 1st grade class. The rest of them are gone. Well, the teacher that I went to was J.R. Till. I met him, and he was now teaching the 5th grade, where he had been teaching he'd been teaching 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 here, but I knew him well. I had been riding to school with him. He would stop by and pick me up in his own car to take me the mile down to the school. So I went to a very familiar teacher that I liked. So it was the transition was easy for me. And at that point, I began to know children from the Stockton community as well as the Latham community. Recess at Latham School was mayhem and murder for young kids. There was absolutely no supervision on the playground. And there was one boy by the name of Irving Hadley who had not been to school himself for several years. So he was 3 or 4 years older than I, but in the first grade with me. And he became my protector when the older boys decided to play the game called pile on sacks. This was to take a little fella, throw him down, and then everybody else piled on top of him. And you just piled on and on and on until you literally, it's a wonder that somebody didn't get killed. But Irvin would protect me. He would throw himself, being older and bigger and stronger, he would throw himself across my small body, and on his hands and knees, he would keep me from being mashed to death at the bottom of the pile. There was a game of tops, and you would spin it, you draw a big circle in the earth out there about 6 feet in diameter, and somebody would wind up his top would have a very sharp point on it. I remember you called it the null, and you would throw it into that pile down there, and it would go in there and spin, and then it was everybody else's desire to take his top and knock that one out of the pile. If you knocked it out, you could own that his top. But what you really wanted to do was split it in half. And some of these tops, when you would throw them, they would backfire and go flying out through the crowd in the back. And it's a wonder somebody didn't have his eye put out. Another great game, we had a telephone system, a private telephone system in this community from about 1920 to about 1925, when it went defunct. There was just nobody to take care of it, and it just fell into decay. And there was plenty of number 8 wire everywhere you would look alongside the road. And the bigger boys took these strands and wove about 2 or 3 together, and a long string, and they would climb an oak tree on the school grounds and tie one end to the end of a limb, and then they would wind into this long wire at intervals, a cross piece, and a boy would stand on each side, and there were just as many cross pieces in that piece of wire as there were kids. So we might have 20 kids hitched to one wire like a logging team, and we would pull that limb down and strip it from that tree. As soon as one limb was down, we stripped another and another and another, and we enlarged the playground so that we could play a little more baseball. But we stripped bare every oak tree that was around anywhere around the area of that school ground. Another great game was hogs were running wild around the schoolyard, and where people ate lunches, there were the hogs hung around the schoolhouse, and there were fleas. But it was in the days of dipping of cattle when there would be great cattle drives, and everybody in the community would join in the drive, and everybody would round up everybody else's cattle and drive them down and put them through the dipping vat. Well, out in front of the school, there was a ditch. The road had been newly graded, and after every rain, there was a mud hole in front of the ditch. And the county had put up a wire fence that didn't go anywhere. It just fenced off the front of the school. And these hogs had made a hole in it, and we would gather them up and drive them through that hole one at a time and jump them off into that puddle of water. The older hogs had no problem going through there, but the little pigs had to struggle. They had to swim. But that was great sport to dip all those hogs. Another great sport, at lunchtime, we were right across from the church, and the church had built some tables for serving lunch at church that were built on the school ground. And we got up on those tables to eat our lunch, and we would drop bait for the hogs, and the older boys would reach down and grab a pig by the tail, and with his pocket knife he would slice the pig's tail off, and the pig would go off, week, 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 week. That was great fun. And then of course there were the fights. There was a fight every day. Mayhem and murder. And it was worse when we got to Stockton, because it was more people and some meaner ones down there, and there was the rock throwing, and the blood was let down there. Well, there was always bullying. And I remember this one boy would back me up in the corner and dare me to fight him, and I was afraid of him. I would come home and dream of all the ways I was going to retaliate, which I never did, never had the nerve to do. I met him later on in life, and we became good friends. But we had a good school at Stockton. We had some good teachers, and when I went on to Baymanet, I had no problems whatsoever, because I had been well taught in the smaller school at Stockton. Became a believer in small schools. When the county purchased the school ground for the new junior high school at Stockton, there was an abandoned automobile in the branch that ran directly through the playground. And we dismantled that complete automobile. Mostly we were looking for wire out of the generator that we wanted to do all sorts of things, but it was great fun dismantling that car. We took it completely apart. It would have been a wonderful antique to restore today. I think it was a Dodge.